So let's see. First, I want to make sure I say to start a huge thank you to Stephanie because this space is amazing, and the idea is amazing to have a gallery that's showing things that make us think a little more deeply about death and maybe celebrate it, even the parts that are a little bit scary, because it's kind of an amazing event. I think of it as, and especially in the last few years as I have been working on this project, I've been realizing that it's like an amazing, momentous human event that we all share. I'm sorry to tell you all, we're all going to die. So that's my talk. A few years ago, I started designing an alternative to cremation and burial, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. I will not be as exciting as that, unfortunately, because that's amazing. But the reason I did so, well, first of all, just as background, I come from a family with a lot of medical professionals in it, and it wasn't unusual, I'm sure John Pierre, my brother, can attest to this, to talk about death and dying at the dinner table when we were young. It wasn't always the topic, but it wasn't really that uncommon for us to talk frankly about this stuff. So I have to assume that's part of the reason that I've done this work, I think. And then a few years ago, I went to architecture school, and at the same time, I had 2 small children. And I don't know how many of you have kids. Nobody. Awesome. Okay. Let me tell you what happens when you have little kids. One of the things that happens is like you see them growing literally from day to day, getting older. And I remember one day looking at my littlest and being like, "Oh my God, he's growing so fast. It's amazing. He's growing up. What about when he's 40? What about when he's 50? That's going to be so cool." And I was like, "Holy crap, I'm going to be really old then." And it was like in a second, I was like, they're growing up and I'm growing down. Like, I'm going to die someday. It hit me at 33 or so. Maybe you all realize that already. But I think for a lot of us, we have this moment where that happens. So that happened to me in architecture school, where I was already thinking about systems and human problems, because one of the things we do in architecture school is try to solve problems through design. So because I realized I was going to die someday, all of a sudden, I was curious to know what my non-religious family would do with my body when I died. Most of my loved ones are non-religious. A lot of them maybe would consider themselves spiritual in different ways, and a lot of times that has, for many of them, I'd say that is connected in some way to their love of nature, broadly speaking. So there's something there, but it's not an organized religion. And I realized that for people with organized religions, there's a bit of guidance when someone you love dies. So it's like, if you have a rabbi or a priest, they will usually guide you through that time. And there's millions of people who don't have religions, and I started to think about what it's like for those of us who don't, and without specific cultural religious guidance, essentially we're at the mercy of an $11 billion funeral industry. So it's suddenly about being guided by people who, not always, but for many of whom are just trying to make a living, or sell you what you maybe don't need. Anyway, take a breath and some water here. So I started looking into current options we have for our bodies when we die, and everyone knows cremation and conventional burial, which for the purposes of this I'm usually talking about because it usually includes an embalming and then a burying in a conventional cemetery, which usually includes a casket and a concrete grave liner. So that's typically what a conventional burial is, and I think still it's more than 50% of Americans that are buried in a conventional way. And like, I know that cremation is rising very quickly because people are appreciating it as a lower cost and simpler option. And that's somewhere around 35% now, and forecasted to be more than 50% of Americans by like 2017. So things are changing quite a bit as people, I don't know why actually, but we can imagine the reasons why. But I was thinking that neither of those options is particularly meaningful to me. And especially conventional burial, most of you can probably imagine it's not an environmentally beneficial system. In fact, it's actually quite harmful. It's toxic. It's fairly wasteful. And as so many of us live in cities now, it's becoming, as we kind of learned from the video, it's harder and harder to imagine using land for one body at a time forever. So I thought, okay, if those options aren't great, well, I love the idea of a natural burial in some natural setting somewhere. It's really lovely. You know, conservation land is often used for natural burials where the body's wrapped in a shroud rather than a casket, and there's no embalming, and bodies are just 3 feet down instead of 6, so that beneficial microbes can get there quicker, and there's oxygen, and sometimes even plant roots can access the body. So I thought that's beautiful, right? As soon as possible, turning back into the earth. And also, you know, we have a fair amount of nutrients in us. We have other things in us too. Sometimes we have pharmaceuticals in us or mercury in our teeth. But let's just assume that, like, on the whole, we could give back if we wanted to. So I love that idea, and yet I kept coming back. Oh, and I should say I also started to realize that for many people who are cremated or buried, were brought out of the city. So if you're a city dweller and you die, or I assumed I would be cremated, and my family would bring me to the oceans and sprinkle me somewhere. But the ocean, where just nature, it's so majestic, it's beautiful. And then I wondered, well, what is it? What is it about dying or imagining dying or grieving that we need to be connected to nature, and is that important? And how is it important? And let's assume it's important, which I did, and I still do. If that's important, you know, so holding that idea that's important, could I design a system, an alternative to cremation and burial that connected us deeply to nature, but yet was for an urban setting? Because the other thing is I love living in my cities. I say cities because I haven't figured out which one is my favorite yet, but and I think there's something very beautiful about the idea that maybe I could stay in a city after I died. And I like to think about this project that I'm about to show you as being folded back into the city after we've died, growing new life after we've died. Okay, I think that's got to be enough of a setup. That's the history of how it started. So what you're about to see actually is my architectural thesis from my schooling in architecture. So, and the images are also out there. You've maybe seen them before. And I think I'll kind of walk you through the system and the ritual that I've designed, and then talk a little bit about what the project's doing now, like where it is, because it's actually come a distance from architecture school. So, okay. So, the Urban Death Project is what I'm currently calling this project. It's very frank, and it grates some people, don't like it actually, which I think is a whole other interesting conversation. The project is about life, and yet it's also about death in an urban setting, and so I wanted to really have it be as frank as possible. And I should say also that, like, one of the things that Stephanie does so well, and so many people in this, it's not an industry, what is this? Community? Yeah. Thank you. Are enabling and, like, encouraging people to talk about death in other ways than what we're used to. So, you know, there's many ways we can talk about death, and there's very few ways we usually do, and we fear it, of course, which makes sense. But I think I'm missing a very important point, which is that the project is an alternative to burial cremation. It is a system that uses the process of composting to turn our dead into nutrient-rich, soil-building material. Sometimes I say soil, but if you know what finished compost looks like, it's not actually soil. It's rich, earthy, almost soil amendment, if you will. So that's what this system does. It's also, though, as I started to work on it, I realized it's also a ritual, or at least a framework for ritual, because I don't think we just need, you know, a system to dispose of bodies. I think we need a place and a way to reconnect to the earth, and then honor our dead. So I feel like maybe I'm missing a piece before I keep going. Is everyone with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the outside of the building, and I'm starting with it so that you get the sense that, number one, these are actual built spaces. They're places in the city that you would come and lay your deceased to rest and say goodbye there and have a ceremony. And then you would also, in a month later, come back and take some of the compost that's been created from your loved one. What you see here on the right is, well, so it's hard to see the staircase. This is just one design that I put together of a space that would house this system and this ritual. And it's really important that it's just one design. This will never be built, this exact one. I was in my architecture school project. It should never be built. What I hope will be built are many systems like this, or buildings like this, that house the system and the ritual and the ceremony space, but that are each tailored to this community and the neighborhood that they're in, and designed by many different designers and architects. Again, specific for the community and the neighborhood that they're in. But this is a great way to sort of give you a sense of what I'm talking about in terms of scale and the place. So right here there's some stairs leading down to, that's the sort of viewing pool of finished compost, for lack of a better term. And cut through the stairs I have ramps, which is important for accessibility. Also that you could bring a wheelbarrow down and take the compost. Because again, it's about folding the dead back into the communities and the cities where we've lived. So I'm actually suggesting that the community itself could come and take compost and use it to grow new life. So this is the outside. Maybe go to the next slide, please. Oh great, here's the section cut through. So here you're getting a sense, section cuts where you slice the building in half from the top. So here you're getting a sense of this design, and some of the things I think are going to be similar going forward, and some will be just changing slightly, but on the right here you come in, the grievers come in, friends and family come in the building, and are confronted with this core, which in this design is concrete and about 3 stories tall. This design, by the way, was for a space in Lower Manhattan. I found a site that was empty, and so I used that as my site for the building. And then what you see there, the brownish things, are ramps that wrap around the core and that bring friends and family up to the top of the core where bodies are laid in. Over time, the bodies decompose, and at the bottom there you're sort of seeing a screening process conceptually drawn, and then a corkscrew conveyor that pushes the finished compost out. The process takes about 30 days. What I didn't say yet was that the science for this wasn't something I had to make up. It's already there. So in the olden days, if you were a farmer and you had a bunch of cows and a couple of them died, you could call the renderer, and he or she maybe, but probably he, would come in his little cart, pick up your cows for free, and go make soap out of them. That industry doesn't really exist anymore. So for small to large scale farms, we're having trouble with livestock mortalities. They didn't know what to do with the animals. They would toss them on the back 40, but that was a problem with scavengers. So they might bury them, but oftentimes it's not an effective, it wouldn't be an effective burial. It's kind of messy. So a bunch of research institutions, at least one in every state, Cornell, Washington State University, etc., the list goes on, have put together papers and done a lot of research into livestock mortality composting. And so they're finding it's a very effective and sanitary and sustainable way to dispose of an animal carcass. We're talking like a big cow. So I did a lot of research looking into how that was done, and found that for farmers they lay about 18 inches of wood chips and sawdust on the ground, lay the animal down, and then another 18 inches of wood chips and sawdust over the animal, and in about 3 months, without turning or anything, the animal's gone. Sometimes larger bones are left, and they do a little bit of either turning then, or sometimes they'll just grind them up and apply that to the fields, but it's actually really good finished compost. A couple things to mention about compost real quick. So I'm not assuming that everyone knows what I'm talking about. One is that bodies are made up of lots of stuff, but also nitrogen. We're a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium. And wood chips and sawdust are super, super highly concentrated in carbon. And if you've ever had a kitchen compost, you know that you want to have the right mix, the right ratio of nitrogen and carbon to make a good compost pile, to make the compost heat up, and that's when you know it's working, which is going to be key in a minute. And so, in your kitchen pile, the green stuff, the food stuff, is what's nitrogen, and then you might add like newspaper or hay or something like that. In this case, with livestock mortalities, they're finding that wood chips and sawdust, like almost like wood chips, wood shavings, are a really excellent way to mix with the body and make compost. So, the other thing to mention is that in that process, I don't know if you've ever seen a mulch pile that's like 8 feet high and steaming on a winter morning. That's because the decomposition process creates a lot of heat, which is really important because that's what's killing the pathogens. And so, in a system on a farm, but especially in a system like this, as we get a little more into the detail, it's really important that heats up, killing the pathogens, and that's what makes it a sanitary process. So,
do you know if it's possible to capture that heat and like make it and like power the?
I was wondering. It's a great question.
Yeah.
In this design, this is pretty conceptual still, and we're going to be I'll get into the engineering in a bit, just a tiny bit, but I was really into the idea that the concrete core would be warm to the touch. So that would just be the idea of coming in, climbing ramps, or feeling the power of what's happening inside was really moving to me. But I don't know that that's exactly what will be happening, and depending on the final design. But
I've heard of people using compost piles to heat water.
Yeah, I built a compost pile like that once. It was, a compost heating system. It definitely works. Yeah, totally.
I don't suppose you know how much energy per pound or cubic meter.
I don't know. No, I don't know.
I know in Vancouver they actually have, when they built the Olympic Village, there's a sewage treatment section of the city that powers like a third of the new. So like their own sort of like self-composting system actually powers and heats part of their,
I think Vancouver might be a good city for this project.
Totally agree with you.
Can you go to the next slide, I think? So I'm just gonna, so again, these are renderings from the first design I did, where I was actually thinking less about the engineering what's happening in the core, because in architecture school it's not really what you're supposed to do. I'm thinking more about the space and the feel. And so this is the image where you've just walked in the front door, and imagine it as about the scale of like a city lot, or maybe 2 in width. It's not supposed to, it's supposed to feel like the scale of the neighborhood. So walking in, you're confronted right away with this core, because it's kind of a magic thing that's happening inside, if you ask me, and rather sacred. And then the series of ramps that wrap up, and you can see the person at the top there is actually touching the core and feeling warm to the touch. So you can go to the next one. And then one of the things that I think is really important for this project is that in as many ways as possible, I want to be distinct from the current funeral industry, because I think that there's a lot of problems with it, and also that we just, as a thoughtful, caring society, can do a little bit better with death care. And so I think that there's value in getting reconnected with our dead. In the olden days, again, we used to bury our own, wash and build our own coffins. And I think there's probably, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think there's value in that. And I think that for grieving, there's something to be said for being closer to the death experience. And so one of the spaces built in that you won't see here is a space that I call a shrouding room, where people on staff in the building would be, the term is death midwives, where they're there to help families prepare the body for the laying in ceremony, which is happening. And here you're seeing that mourners would actually carry the body up to the top. And I designed that holding the tarp thing. Those firewood carriers that are like canvas? It's just an extruded one of those. So you can go to the next one. So at the top of the core, the walls continue up, but there's a series of catwalks inside the core, and actually families and friends are encouraged to create a space for the body by moving wood chips away with like a rake or a shovel, and lay the body in, cover it up. One of the things I'm talking with the engineers I'm working with about is having the shroud itself be impregnated with some of the beneficial microbes that will help the body decompose. So if that were the case, then maybe they're included in the ritual would be some sort of ladling of water over the body after it's laid into the wood chips. And it's covered up, and words can be said, and then that's the ceremony. The ceremony can be tailored per family, but that's the idea. And then I think it would be great if most of these buildings also had downstairs a space for a party, because let's just say, like, shouldn't we also be able to celebrate that life? I mean, this moment is one thing, and I think would be very moving and intense, and then I think downstairs maybe there can also be that celebration of life. But it really would depend on the traditions of the people involved. You can go to the next one. Thanks.
Yeah.
So this is just to give you a sense of, I mean, I think the best thing that this shows, a few years after I've done it and now have critiqued it to pieces, is that the finished compost is really featured here. And I think that's one of the things that I do think should carry through from design to design. Like, that compost is, in my mind, it's sacred, and yet it's also very productive and to be used and not precious. So maybe there's a difference between being sacred and being precious or something. One of the things I want to explore is having relationships or partnerships with city parks, for example, where this compost is always used to grow Central Park. If you live in New York and you go through one of these systems, like, you're going to end up in Central Park. I mean, I think that would be kind of great. Some of the parks aren't as awesome, though, so it kind of depends on the park. But yeah, you can go to the next one. I can't remember. This might be time for me to tell you about where the project is. Maybe, do you have any questions about what I've showed you and said so far?
Yeah,
Why did you decide to make the building stark? Like,
Because I was in architecture school.
Because it's
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean, it was even more. The images are funny. So they were even more stark. Like a few months ago, they just like didn't even have any green. And then someone was like, this project is all about life. And I was like, I know it is. They're like, your images don't show that. And I was like, you're so right. I haven't had time to get back to making images, which is I'm going to soon, which is going to be great. But it's just
it seems
it's not
logical to me that you would use some of the compost to grow plants in the building.
Yeah.
Especially if they were like the type of flowers that you lay on.
Yeah, there definitely should be more. I have a lot of issues with the images. It's just what I have right now to show the project.
That was an impression I had too of the outside, like
Yeah.
that image.
The first
You
image.
know,
Yeah.
it's just like, I would rather see like a huge garden of
Yeah.
what could be created from, like, I feel like it would be more inviting. Or
I totally
like something
agree.
more that I would want to
Well,
do.
again, I think that works with, community. If you're in a more urban setting, I mean, it would be nice to have something that sort of like
Right.
fits completely with it. You have things like climate, you have things like, different kinds of, flowers and, flora and fauna that are all going to have to be taken into account.
One thing that happened in school was that I got really obsessed with the idea that soil and decomposition are nature. So I was like, I'm going to celebrate those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, part of me was like, I don't want to put a bunch of green on top because we already feel like that's nature. But what's really important is like the fact that we have decomposition, but we're afraid of it. It's scary, but we need it to live. So I was like, let's just really focus on that. So hence, that's what you see. But yeah, there needs to be some sort of middle ground. I think.
One comment, one question. You kind of inadvertently created an obelisk, and there's this giant pillar in, I think it's Italy, that has this like twisting, story around it and bas relief on it. And essentially you have this interesting situation where like the walls of the cement chamber are currently stark and barren. But you actually have obelisks being like typical funerary monuments in Egypt and a variety of other places. And so this is like this weird opportunity for being a procedural situation. Yeah. And secondarily, how public are like the grounds and stuff? Because you have this very clear delineation between like the pillar and the sort of interior temple, and then like the area around it. And how much does the public interact with that? Can they go up to the soil itself? What is their relationship to it if they're just walking past?
My goal is to have it be completely open to the public, and like you'd come by on your lunch break and you'd think about how amazing it is that this happens, and the only question will be how that works with different like ceremonies happening. If someone's died and the friends and family are there, then it wouldn't work to have it be open to the public. So I don't exactly know how that will work out, but the goal is that if it's not being used to lay someone literally into the system, then yeah, it would be something you could explore. Because I also like playing in cemeteries when I was a kid. I think they should be more public spaces. Did you have one?
Yeah, I was wondering, engineering-wise, is it a requirement that the central pillar is made of like just poured concrete, or could it be more artfully materialized?
No, it totally could be lots of things. And in fact, yeah, I don't know what the first prototype will be. My goal is to, like I said, get back to designing and design the actual space that will happen outside of Seattle. It'll be completely different, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, do you have a time frame?
Yes, I say in the next 18 months.
Oh, cool, wow.
But I mean, sometimes I say 3 years. It sort of depends on how I'm feeling, but I mean, they're all full speed ahead, and yeah, I mean, it's going to be about, it's going to be about finding funds, raising funds for this, and yeah, I don't know, it's a great question. But I'm going as sort of
no pressure, no pressure.
Ahead.
Well, how can we help? Isn't a good question to follow up.
You can help by, let's see.
Besides tons of money.
Yeah, give me tons of money. You can like sign up for on the website to be given updates, but more than which would just be great because I would know that you want to know what's happening with the project. But then share the project with your friends. I think just the more people that know about it right now, the more chances like that person is like, I'm going to build the first one. So that would be cool. But yeah, share the project. Thank you.
Have you talked at all about the differences between like your first prototype stages of like, I don't know, do you know what you're gonna do for your first prototype?
Do you mean what it's gonna?
Like what is it gonna look like? Maybe where, like who might you talk to in order to start that prototype? Like where is that land gonna be?
I assume it will be outside of Seattle because I live there, and I think there's probably people who would, when they find out, when I find them, would be like, I'll donate this land to you. I think probably not right smack in the middle of the city the first time because we'll need to like prove that it's a really great, and obviously I guess it goes without saying like that first one is going to have so much attention. I mean, this actually gets a fair amount of attention already because it's just kind of like, it's about death, and I mean, all press is good press or whatever. I mean, it's okay that that's happening. I'm really happy that it's happening, but it doesn't feel like it's in some of the press stuff is in my control at all, which is really interesting. And then also, but because of that, like the experience for anyone walking through the prototype prototype won't be the name for long because it's like the worst name ever, but it has to be really incredible. So I need a lot of help in collaborating to make that happen, to make it just great, Yeah.
It does seem like a lot of the benefit of it is that connection to the local environment, and so I can see like the creation of that space either through like a flower garden or something that people would normally, I guess, would want to go through for some reason that's not just sort of focusing on the product that's coming out of the decomposition, but of sort of what's generated from that, and sort of rather than taking it to another park, incorporating that into the space itself.
Yeah, I think the volume of material we'll have will be too much for just on site, depending on the site a little bit. I mean, assuming they're all pretty small footprint-wise, but I do agree that there should be lots of things growing there because then it becomes a place where you come to remember your loved ones, because they're there too.
The other thing is that it does seem like people who would be most interested, like there's a lot of talk about who are the people who sort of buy into this, or who are you know, we're going to agree despite whatever difficulties there might be. And it seems like those are going to be the people who have this sort of strong attachment to the place. Either someone who comes from Seattle and has moved away and says, but you know, my heart is there, and that's where I want to be, and I want to be part of that when I'm laid to rest. And so, yeah, just thinking about it, it seems like that connection to the local location is a really important part of it, and that seems like a really strong element.
Yay! Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'm really glad you recorded this because I'll need to digest all the good comments.
Yeah,
Like,
it's been an amazing conversation. So
yeah,
so
it's so
pleased that
great.
everybody had.
Thank you. I mean, all the stuff, like, will go into the design. I mean, it's all just at the beginning stage, obviously. So it's really great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming too, and just like actually voicing your opinions. I think that's the heart of the Body Appropriate, is to start these conversations and having like a platform and a space to have, I don't know, permission to talk. So always feel free to come back, and if you have ideas for the space too. Oh right, there's a mailing list by as you walk out the door, so if you do want to come back and hear about the future events, be part of the community, sign that. So yeah. And stick around too if you want to keep talking to each other. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to
No, just thank you so much, and thanks to you.
Thanks. Great.